Hello and welcome back to the Ballymaloe Festival of Food podcast. Today we're stepping slightly behind the curtain of the restaurant world. What are we up to, Brie?
Our guest is Joe Warwick, a food writer, long-term observer of the global restaurant scene, and was also involved in the early days of the world's 50 best restaurants.
But this is the most interesting thing, right? I had a look at his Instagram bio and I think this actually says it best. He says he eats, drinks, writes, talks, waits, and we're about to find out what the etc. is as well.
He also describes himself as a restaurant fluffer. I love every time I say that word. Which we definitely need to unpack, and he's currently on the floor of the Fat Badger. We are so excited they're joining us at the Ballymaloe Festival of Food this year with a pop-up dining experience in the Woodshed.
And Joe is also one of the co-authors of Where Chefs Eat, a guide to the restaurants chefs actually go to themselves, which feels very fitting for this conversation we're about to have.
In this episode, we're looking beyond the hype and the headlines to explore what's really going on in the restaurant culture today, from rankings and reputation to media narrative to how dining itself is changing.
And fair warning, listeners, this might get a little bit honest, which I'm hoping it will, maybe even a bit uncomfortable in places.
Which, let's face it, is usually where the most interesting conversations happen.
Joe, you're so welcome. Thank you for coming along.
Pleasure.
Now, I want to know, do you want to go straight into the restaurant fluffer part, or do you want to go into something else?
You can go straight into the restaurant fluffer part.
Please, tell us.
I'm going to assume people know what a fluffer is, but
Jolene didn't. I had to tell her.
It's borrowed, I believe, from pornographic films. But no, basically, I went into this local wine bar that had just opened near where I live in northwest London. And I was, talking, because I'm always interested when these places open. I was talking to the lady that owned it. And she's going, oh, yeah. She goes, oh, I know you. You're the restaurant fluffer. And I said, okay. So I didn't know whether to be pleased or insulted about that. But I eventually decided it was a badge of honor. So that's why it sits on my Instagram profile.
It's a good one. It's a good one. It sticks. It's quite memorable. So fair play to that lady. Yeah. When we were chatting the other day, and I found this absolutely fascinating, you quite openly said that you were like jaded with a lot of the conversation around restaurants at the moment, and I think that really struck me. So I'm going to go straight headfirst in here. Do you think that the way that we talk about restaurants today actually reflects what's really going on inside them? And if you were to compare the two kind of narratives, what are we getting right? And, well, what are we getting completely wrong in there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I worked as a journalist for a long time. I'm not really doing journalism anymore. I've kind of gone full circle from working in restaurants to writing about restaurants to writing about food to, via the pandemic and various other things, ending up back in working in restaurants. So I kind of see both sides of it. I think, certainly in the UK, I think, the mainstream media, although I hate using that term, restaurants and food, it's very interesting. You go to France and restaurants and food are in the culture section. They're in the lifestyle section. It tends to be in the UK, which I think says a lot about how we consider them. So a lot of it's very disposable. A lot of it's very silly. And I think particularly when it comes to restaurants, we want to be peddle cliches about, we'll talk about this later, obviously, about angry chefs and, the chaos of it. And even when it's portrayed on TV and things like Boiling Point, it tends to be kind of negative. And I understand that because there's drama in that and that's what people want to tap into. But what's very interesting for me, having gone back into it after, decade and a half more doing journalism, and I've gone back into restaurants and I'm working for a very young team with Public House and Fat Badger and the Pelican, is the industry's changed a lot for the better. It's a much better place to work. The working conditions are better. The pay's better. Different kind of people working in it as well. That maybe before, and there's this kind of transitory profession where you become, particularly front of house, a waiter because you want to be an actor or a journalist or a writer or something else. It's just something to pay your bills. There's a lot of people that are getting into it, in their early 20s, and this is what they want to do for a career because they can see a progression to being a general manager. Well, they've got a good life. They're well paid. They're doing something they love. They like looking after people. They love food. They love travel. So I think you don't tend to read about that side of it. It's particularly at the moment, there's this very, and I understand why, very negative conversation in the UK because trading conditions have got so hard with the price of everything and what's going on.
Yeah.
And the VAT and the tax rises and all that, and its margins being squeezed. And I understand that, and I know a lot of people are losing their businesses on the back of that. I think a lot of those businesses would have gone down anyway, because I kind of think, and this sounds harsh, I think, like many businesses, the restaurant industry is Darwinian, and it always has been. It's just maybe a little bit tougher at this moment. I still think it's about craft and graft, and I think, without sounding naive, there are exceptions, of course, but if you've got a really good idea, if you've got a really good business, and you know what you're doing, and you're not silly, you can make it work. It's very hard, but
it is
the
hard.
reason you get into it is because you're passionate about it. If you want an easy business, you'd be working in an office or doing something, much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think kind of that sensationalism as well is kind of like what sparks interesting conversation and kind of captures the imagination of what's going on. But you're dead right. It's such a tough industry to be there and to work in and to make a success, but it can be done. And I love that kind of idea of shifting into career progression. And I've noticed that growing up in a pub as well, in a restaurant, that when we had people in particular from France coming to work there, they really kind of saw it as a career, whereas Irish people, it was more like, this kind of stopgap between just being able to pay off, whatever student expenses you had,
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I mean, I left the restaurant industry the first time. I was managing a restaurant with a nightclub in like 1999 in West London. And I got burnt out for various reasons. And I had always wanted to write and do journalism. So I did a journalism course and continued to work part-time. But if someone had said to me back in, then actually, this is your career path, this is what you can do. I think we have been very bad at developing our people and showing them what the future looks like. It's like, okay, you're having to do all of this now, but this is what you can earn later. This is the life you can have, instead of being caught in, and it is still a hard physical job. The hours are antisocial. All your friends tend to be in the restaurant industry because there's the other people that are off when you're off. You know what I mean? The civilians generally aren't. I mean, I'm now lucky I get Sundays off so I can hang out with my family. They mightn't think that's lucky, but yeah. So, that work-life balance is still tough.
It's a great fun career. Like, I love hospitality and I love service, and there's the buzz in service, and there's a huge camaraderie in the people you work with. So actually you can have, nowadays especially, a wonderful work-life balance in some ways, because you're not turning up to work and it's a drag. You're turning up to work because it's good fun, actually. Yeah. Or can be. It can, some nights are better than others, obviously, but yeah, most of the time it's good fun.
But also, particularly, in a big city, you're working with people from all over the world. I remember the first place I went to work, so when I got back into it this time in like 2020-ish, and I went to work at a place called Sola, and the team there was so international. There was Portuguese, there was Brazilians, there was Greek, there was a girl from India, and it was lovely. It was kind of, nice. It felt very cosmopolitan, very London, or very big city, and that was kind of nice to meet all these different people and where they were coming from. And we were brought together by looking after people, and we got a Michelin star, and it was fantastic. I think probably in terms of the workforce, I'd say probably restaurants, hospitality, or you probably get the most diverse workforce.
Yes, yeah. And a real view on the world stage in that, yeah.
And I think the other thing that's changed, certainly in the company I work with, although there's still a lot of work to be done, is more and more women in kitchens, which is great. And I just, might sound patronising or silly, but I do believe it's a civilizing influence. I've seen nights where it's just the guys there and you can smell the testosterone, and it's not nasty, but it's a different vibe. And then when there's 3 or 4 women in the kitchen, it's much more relaxed and nicer. I'd say it's nicer. And the food's just as good. It's just slightly less aggressive, slightly less,
Yeah. Well, you're coming to the right place for a female-led kitchen anyway.
Well, exactly. But that didn't, those, obviously we had the River Cafe, and there's, Alice Waters and, various places that were doing that. But I think it's becoming more and more. And again, I think because the working conditions are getting better, and because people are being more understanding about things like maternity leave and work-life balance, women are staying in the industry, cooking, rather than just having, every time I used to, back when I did journalism, I was like, speak to a female chef. And it would always be the same 3 women you'd speak to. And now, if you've got to get a quote, it's much easier now. You don't have to kind of balance things out in the same way by speaking to the same 3 people all the time, because there's more and more women coming through that want to do this for a living and stay in it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's obvious to see that the industry is better, but like it is kind of complicated because there are things that are still very unstable, like, and even in a way kind of like broken, like all these cost pressures of running a business in particular.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, it's tough. What do you see that's still broken in that whole story?
Well, I think we resist it. It's a business at the end of the day. And if you can't make the numbers work, no one has a job, and the restaurant doesn't exist. So I'm an artist, obviously. I never get involved in the bean counting. I'm terrible. When I took this job, I said to them, listen, I really, because I'm kind of in ops. That's what I do. I work service. I said, listen, I don't want to go to a lot of meetings. I've been at a company just before that where it was just, I was going on a line bike from pub to pub, looking at spreadsheets, talking to people. I didn't actually feel like I was doing anything. But at the same time, I understand, you've got to keep costs under control. Now, particularly, the difference in your labor, not being silly, not wasting drink, not wasting food. Those make big differences. And yeah, it is pressure, but I think you take the fun stuff. Yeah, it's great being in service and it's great cooking and creating all these lovely stuff things. You got to understand that the other side of that is, you've got to have some fiscal responsibility. You've got to understand how this works to pay your wage and everyone else's wage. And if you want to hire another chef or you want to hire another waiter, or, I'm trying at the moment to find, we've got live music. I'm trying to find a full-time sound guy to manage the live music, which would make my life much easier. All those things have got to be paid for. So you've got to find a way to make that money so you can have the fun, So it's all about balance, like everything,
Yeah. And with everything costing so much, it's like actually getting the punters in the door as well to spend their money. Like it's that culture that spreads right across, isn't it? Of just having enough cash in your pocket, right?
Yeah, and I think people are going out less, certainly. I think, where I am in West London, Notting Hill, it's a little bit of a bubble. There's a lot of people around there with money. Thanks to the people that go in there, the celebrities and stuff that have gone in there, we get a lot of Americans coming in. I had a table, 2 tables last night that turned up. Our set menu is £105 before service charge, before you've had a glass of water. It's a high end product. I had 2 tables that turned up, lovely Americans from Chicago, booked 2 tables for 5. Between them, they had 7 children. Some of them were 6 and 8. And I was like, but I don't have a kids menu. And they were quite happy to pay the full whack for all those kids and left with a smile on their face. But, they were staying at the Dorchester. Money wasn't. So
they had a great time.
we get those kind of people. But you don't just want to be a restaurant for people that have got money. You want to have a mix of people. That's what makes a great restaurant. Sometimes when people it'll be a special one-off meal. They're coming up to the theatre. They come out once a year. They want to go somewhere nice. They come and see us. But it is harder. The people that were maybe coming in, 2-3 times a month are now maybe coming in once a month or once every 2 months. People are spending less. A lot of people are spending less, looking about what they're spending. But again, London in general is a bit of a bubble. So it's hard. I know, I'm from near Belfast originally. I know it's very tough there. Belfast, I don't know what it's like in Dublin and Cork, but, in Belfast, all the good places are booked out Friday, Saturday night, 6 months in advance. But you go in Monday to Thursday and it's not tumbleweeds, but it's, you can pretty much walk in anywhere. So that's very hard to build a business like that. And if you haven't got a lunch trade, it's very hard to build a business as well. So, we're blessed in London having all of these tourists coming in from all over the world and having all these people with money that are coming from the city and stuff, and so it makes it a lot easier, you know.
Yeah, it's quite kind of a unique offering, really, of London. I was there recently, and I just kind of noticed that so much as well, how different it is. Do you know what? I'd like to kind of step back a little bit into your timeline and your personal journey, because like, you were there in the early days of the world's best 50 restaurants, which probably has become one of the most influential voices now in global food culture. Can you step us back into how that started out?
Do I have to?
Yeah, could you kind of like just set the scene a little bit there?
You know when you're talking about me saying I was jaded. No.
Yeah,
no, I mean,
but I think that's really interesting, because like you're giving us this story about the restaurant industry now with such authority, but that narrative has come from a real place of understanding.
Yeah,
like, so give it to us. Like,
I joke about the 50 best and complain about having to talk about it all the time, or I used to have to talk about it all the time. But I'm also very grateful, because a lot of my career wouldn't happen without it. So, you know, I got to do Where Chefs Eat. I got to do the Radio 4 food program. I'm not saying I wouldn't have got to do any of those things, but yeah, the 50 best albums. So what happened was, Restaurant Magazine was a little trade magazine, started in 2001, London, with 3 editors, which was an interesting move. And I was the staff writer. I'd worked with one of the editors before at the Times and at a magazine called Eat Soup, which was a men's food and drink magazine. It was launched in the mid-90s. And we were trying to, like, you know, I think the circulation was something like, was it 10,000? Or maybe we were aiming for 10,000. It was, you know, we were trying, we came out every fortnight, and the tagline was for the professional and the passionate. We were a much sexier version of Caterer and Hotel Keeper, which was the kind of, you know, mainstay trade magazine. So we were trying to bring consumer production values in terms of the design and how everything looked, and just take a slightly different approach. Trade magazines tend to be very dour, is the word I would use.
Yeah.
Or were back then. And if you look at them now, they're actually less dour, the ones that are left. I mean, they've stopped printing Restaurant Magazine. It's just a website, like a lot of magazines now are, sadly. But anyway, the point was, we were trying, and nobody remembers exactly how, where, why. There was a pub around the corner. We had an offices just off Carnaby Street, which was great back then. And there's a pub around the corner called the Shaston Arms, which has just been relaunched with really good food. I recommend it. And we drink in there all the time. So it probably came from one of the Shaston sessions. How are we going to promote this magazine? We need to come up with something. And someone piped up and said, "Oh, you know, we need to do a, you know, best restaurants list, and, you know, UK." And someone else said the world. You know, nobody knows who. It wasn't me. Okay, but I was the guy that had to write the article, you know.
Okay,
we're going to do this now. Joe, you go away and do it, because I was the staff writer. And I was like, oh, shit, how do I do this? So, you know, I'm really into music. I, you know, read a lot of music magazines like Q and Select and Mojo and things like that. So my approach was, this was a kind of, you know, what's the best album ever? You know, you're talking about, is it Sgt. Pepper's? Is it Astral Weeks? Is it, you know, is it the Stones? It was that kind of approach, and it wasn't meant to be that serious. It was meant to be like, hey, these are great restaurants. This is a fun article. This is a profile. Hear about this place in Spain. Here's this little seafood shack. And I think we talked to chefs, but at the beginning it wasn't kind of scientific. Like, we're going to talk to so many from America and so many from, you know, Europe, and so many from Asia. It was just like, called up some people I knew, said, look, never said what best meant, which I'll come on to in a little bit.
Okay.
You know, what are the 5 best restaurants? You know, put it into a spreadsheet. It spat out this list, okay? And the original approach was much more eclectic. You know, there would be a seafood shack. There'd be, I mean, I look at it now, it's quite funny. Some of the restaurants in there, I probably stand by, some of them probably not. But, you know, there was a seafood shack, or there's a rooftop restaurant in Hong Kong. There was, you know, place in Australia. There was, I think El Bulli did the first year we did it, and it was just an article came top, because very naturally that place.
And had you been everywhere? Had you been to all the 50 restaurants?
No. So this was the point. It wasn't a case of me going around and at this point and eating in all of these places. It was, I was saying, I don't know. I want to speak to chefs that do know. You are Mark Hicks, or, you know, whoever, Gordon Ramsay, where do you eat? So we just asked all these chefs, so we knew all these contacts. And then I reached out to critics as well. I reached out to critics in North America. And this list came together and we wrote it. And it was, it was an okay list. Came out. No one really paid that much attention to it. Following year happened again. And the event's go, let's do an awards event. We're like, okay. So we'd no money, so we managed to do an awards event, and somehow, I don't know how, we got Roger Moore.
Oh, yeah?
Roger Moore, because we did it in Roger Moore's son's Jeffrey's restaurant. So anyway, we did it, and some chefs turned up, including Ferran Adria and Heston Blumenthal, and we were just like, okay. And the thing kind of snowballed. To the point that I took over as editor, I think, in 2004. So by the time I'd taken over as editor, this thing had snowballed and, it was being picked up by the press. It's like, what is this nonsense? So I kind of sat down and kind of reverse engineered it and go, okay, right, this started off as a kind of throwaway article. How can we actually make this thing stand up a little bit? So I came up with this idea, the Voting Academy. Came up with this idea of, voting panels where you had a chair that selected the panel, and then the panel voted for the restaurant. It was still all going into a spreadsheet, but it was much more considered in terms of who we were asking. Yeah. And still didn't say what best meant, because what does best mean?
What does best mean? Yeah.
Best for what? So, like fast forward to when I did Where Chefs Eat, or the restaurant awards that I launched myself in Paris in 2019, which were called the very similar World Restaurant Awards. Went back to asking, best for breakfast, best for late night, and Where Chefs Eat, putting things into categories, because best means nothing. But anyway, best in terms of the 50 best gradually became a particular kind of restaurant that was in fashion at that time. So I think it was, in terms of the places that topped it, I think it was El Bulli, French Laundry, Noma. There's been various others since. So I left in 2007, and they've changed certain things. So one thing they changed, which I'm pleased about, when I did my award, I did a gender-balanced voting panel for the World Restaurant Awards. 50 best now do that, so that's great. That makes a difference as well, because a lot of the time, 90% of the voters, I think, at that time, what we were talking about earlier, were men. And they've also done this thing where you can only win it once and then you get put in an academy, and I don't understand it. But they've spun it out. So you've now got an Asian 50 best and a, South American 50 best and, 50 best hotels and 50 best vineyards. They're milking the formula, and that's fine. And I'd like to think they're making lots of money out of it. And I'm no longer bitter about it. I was for a little bit, if I'm being honest as well.
And did you lose heart gradually, or was it you just woke up one day and went, actually, this is not the path that I think an awards should?
It was, it was various things. I mean, basically, what happened? Well, they wanted to take me on. I wanted the magazine to reflect the awards, and they wanted the magazine to stay as a kind of like UK kind of trade magazine, and to separate the awards. And they wanted me to do the awards. So I spat the dummy. If I went back in a time machine, would have said, actually, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm proud of what I did with Where Chefs Eat. I'm proud of what I did with the awards that I did, even though they only lasted 1 year. I'll blame COVID. Which
we won, actually, Ballymaloe won Best Trolley.
Yes, of course.
We were so excited.
It was a bit fun as well. I think as well, the 50 best, if I've got to criticise, and this is just me, it's become, of course, it's a serious thing, and it means a lot for people to be in it. It means a lot for businesses to be in it. But it's become quite po-faced. So I think with the awards I did, we had like the sort of serious ones, and then we had more throwaway ones like the best untattooed chef and
untattooed chef. Oh, that's
untattooed chef. Just silly things.
Did you ask them to prove it?
Matty Matheson, who I had him in his in kind of +4 tweed suit with all his tattoos, presenting an award to Alain Ducasse. So they can put that, and I'll put that on my gravestone. That if it achieved nothing else, I achieved that.
Yeah.
But the 50 best is a good thing. We'll come back to like the kind of narrative in the media. Newspapers, it's politics, it's sport, it's showbiz, and restaurants get buried down. So what the 50 best did at least for a while, for a long time, it put restaurants on the front page and got people talking about them and talking about them as kind of culture, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing. And of course, it stirred up a whole lot of shit.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of conspiracy theories involved about it. But at the end of the day, what it basically was and is a magazine article that just got out of hand.
Yeah. Okay.
And
That's
do you-
amazing. Sorry, Brie.
Do you
go ahead.
think that because it turned into a certain kind of restaurant that was getting the top 50, sort of moving off that top 50 slightly, but do you think that started to shape the type of restaurants that we're still seeing today in the way that food is being served to people and that?
Of course, food and restaurants are, followers of fashion, just like everything else. And you see it, and it's like, like if you look at the width of men's trousers, and they go skinny and they go wide, and then they go wide all the way down, and then they flare at the bottom. So, and you look at plates of food, it's the same, from Nouvelle Cuisine. We've went back to Nouvelle Cuisine. I think we're actually coming out of that a little bit. And it's a little bit more now about generosity and the theatre of food. But yeah, completely. Restaurants I remember going because obviously, there was a whole gravy train that came out of the 50 best. And there still is. And I wish all the people on it that they enjoy it and they ride it for as long as possible. But, I remember going to some restaurant in, it must have been Buenos Aires. And this was the South American 50 best. And it was really, really not very good.
Okay.
No, and it wasn't. And it was really, really high. I'm not going to name the restaurant, but it was really high up in the South American list at that point. But it had all the kind of trappings. It had the plates. The chefs were using the tweezers. It was all like kind of a little bit Noma, a little bit El Bulli, but completely shit. So, at the end of the day, you can follow fashion, but unless it's got a soul, some understanding of the produce, some understanding of hospitality, it's not going to mean anything. It's not going to be a restaurant I want to eat in.
Yeah, and it'll fail actually because it hasn't got a heart.
Well, you'd be surprised because people it'll fail eventually, but a lot of people will go for a while because they think this is what they should be eating and this is where they should be going.
Yeah. That's interesting. I can see how it totally kind of shapes the behaviour as well. Like, do you think we take these lists then just too seriously?
Yes. Really, definitely. I mean, there's the UK one now, and the group I work for, there's a gastropub one. It means so much. The Fat Badger's in the UK's top 100 restaurants. We don't know where, and they got it the other day, and George and Beth, both ex-Ballymaloe, they're so made up, and it's going to mean a lot, and we're going to go to the party, and we're going to enjoy it, whether we're at 99 or we're at number 5, it's not going to matter. So it means an awful lot to, I can be cynical about it and say, I know how the sausage is made and be like, oh, wow. But now I'm part of a team in a restaurant. I know how much, and I know how much it meant getting the Michelin star when I was at Sola as well. So, we do take it too seriously, but I kind of understand why. And I think we're going back to talking about how hard it is to make money out of restaurants at the moment. I think you've got to play the game and you've got to be part of it. And it's, as well as it being good for your ego and making you feel good, this works. Any publicity is good publicity, particularly with these kind of things. And there's lots of different lists. I saw, Open Table, which is a booking system, did an awards the other day. All these different awards, and you can be sniffy about them. But A, they mean something to the team, and B, they mean something to your bottom line if you're being a little bit more pragmatic about it. And so, we take it a bit seriously. What I find silly about it, and why I kind of moved away from this kind of, I can't remember who said it. I think maybe it was Will Self, was lists are cultural fascism, which I always thought was a very good line, is this idea about who's number 1 and who's number 2 and making it like Top of the Pops. And I've seen it both when I was on the side of, helping put these lists together and on the other side of it, a restaurant dropping from, the top 10 to outside the 50 for no reason.
Yeah.
Because it's quite arbitrary. And the way it works in terms of the voting is who they've got in that year. If you're a restaurant in a major city as opposed to a little village in the middle of nowhere, of course, you get a lot more of the voting panel going through London, Paris, New York, Sydney than you are going to get, these destination restaurants in the middle of nowhere. It takes much more of an effort.
Yeah.
But yeah, this idea you're dropping and you're going, oh, why have I dropped 40 places? Is my food not as good? Is the service not as good? The food could be better. The service could be better. The room could feel better. But you've dropped for totally arbitrary reasons that are beyond your control. So I think that's the bit you shouldn't take seriously, and you should believe in what you're doing and not worry about if you're at number 2 or you're at number 52 or 102 or not in the list at all. If you got a full restaurant, if you know you've got integrity and you're using great produce and you're training your staff well and everyone's happy, all that other shit doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow. I can imagine, like, if you're part of that list and suddenly you've dropped off, you've done nothing wrong. It's a tough one, but believing in the original message is the key, isn't it? Yeah. Do you ever think with these kind of restaurant lists as well that we're kind of creating this like same style of service chefs training routes, these kind of tweezer style restaurant menus, this like monoculture almost of the restaurant scene? Do you ever feel
another one of the
the case?
funny awards I did it at the World Restaurant Awards, the one I did in Paris, was the tweezer free restaurant of the year.
Oh, I like your humour, Joe.
I mean, I take the piss out of chefs about tweezers. Apparently they're very useful for things, but yeah, the little kind of like, there's all sorts of restaurants, and I really respect. I went to Chapter 1 in Dublin for the first time since the new Chapter 1. I'd been to the old one years ago. Incredibly delicious, incredibly technical. I'm not sure if he's got tweezers in the kitchen, but he probably does. But I respect that, you know what I mean? And I respect places like Noma and Ledbury, Ikoyi, those kind of restaurants. It's a different thing, and I'm not going to be dismissive of haute cuisine. But if we're talking about the sort of food that I want to eat on a regular basis, and more importantly, I can afford to eat on a regular basis, it's not those places. So I think there's all sorts of things. It's like fashion again. I'm pulling it back to clothes, but you've got haute cuisine, slightly impractical things that only celebrities, rock stars, and models wear. And it kind of trickles down, but I think we're moving away from that a little bit. That kind of slightly precious, overwrought, 20 people touching my food, droplets of citrus, all that kind of stuff. I'd like to feel we're moving away from that to get something that's slightly more rustic, even when it comes to fine dining. And I think Irish food's always done that quite well. We don't like things too fussy. Of course we've got lovely fine dining restaurants and have always had, but I think we're quite good at kind of going, there's a lovely piece of fish, there's a lovely piece of meat, there's some vegetables, and that's the way I want to eat now. Increasingly I've kind of moved away from that fanciness, but of course, go on. Sorry,
Alice Waters, I think, summed it up beautifully when one night in the restaurant she just served a perfect peach. She said, peaches are perfect at the moment. This is your dessert. It's the perfect peach. Yeah. And actually, if we take it back to that really delicious food, like really well-grown produce, and serve that, and don't play with it. Just give people delicious food that hasn't been touched by 25 people, and you're not taking a carrot to rehydrate it, to dehydrate it, to turn it into a paste, to put it back into the form of a carrot.
No, yes. And
there's a place for it.
Yeah, I mean,
people are moving more towards.
I went to Chez Panisse, and I remember being given, I think at that point it was the perfect kind of tangerine that they only got in for 2 weeks here or whatever. And it's one of the joys of eating is when, peaches come in and you get the first perfect peach, or you get, in the run up to Christmas, you get your first perfect, tangerine. And that's good. And there's a place for that. I think, and I'm going to swear here, but I always think it's very good. It's Rolly Lee, who's a fantastic chef. Yeah. And he said, it's not complicated. You just buy nice stuff and don't fuck it up too much. And that was his philosophy of cooking. And I kind of agree with that. But at the same time, I do respect people that, make it much more of an intellectual exercise. There's got to be room for both, just like there's room for an art house film and there's room for a rom-com. It's not one size fits all. But again, what does best mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if it was the world's 50 best fine dining restaurants or the world's 50 best haute cuisine restaurants, it was never meant, originally it was much more eclectic, and now I think it tends to be, those tweezery places. And even the term tasting menu is kind of loaded. We do a set menu at the Fat Badger, and people are like, I was going, no tweezers involved. You get some snacks, you get a nice bit of seafood, and then you get a shared main course and some potatoes and a salad. So when you say tasting menu, people automatically think about the tweezers and the little flour being put on top and all of that. And I think there's room for that, but I think again we're looking at how many people can afford to eat in those restaurants on a regular basis. The restaurants that really make an impact on people, it's pubs, where people can eat really well. It's a good fish and chip shop. It's a good curry house. It's where you go to have dim sum. Those are the kind of places that people are eating more regularly and take their families, and they can afford to eat and take their families. And to me, that's just as important as some chef in Paris or London, New York. Much as I respect, as much as I know the graft and the craft that have gone into it, tweezering stuff onto a plate. And I respect both, but the one that I'm going to consume the most of, and it's going to make a bigger difference in my life, is the more accessible place.
Yeah, it's just about to say more accessible. That's it. Where do we go from here?
I couldn't have the coffee.
Have a sip of coffee there. I think it's really interesting as a journalist how you have the power to tell the story of food and I suppose frame people's thoughts on what it is. And I feel like in particular a lot of the conversations like around our restaurant scene is dictated by journalists as such. And one of the things that's really sprung to mind recently is the controversy around Noma. And you've mentioned Noma a few times there in the last half hour. When something like that story breaks, like how close do you think that public conversation is to what's actually going on behind the scenes? And I know now our culture has changed over the last decade as well, and a lot of the stuff that was written about in that Noma story was from 10, 15 years ago. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, full disclosure, he's a friend of mine. I first went to the restaurant, I think back in 2005, maybe 2004. I can't remember. We put him on the cover of Restaurant Magazine, and I remember going there when he was in the original location and just being so impressed with him and being impressed with that kind of food, because it was fine dining, but at that point anyway, it was a lot less tweezery, for want of a better answer.
Yeah, but it was also very.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it was also very theatrical. It was the first restaurant I went to in those days, which it was a theatre performance as well, with the chefs coming out and circling the table and putting the plates down. And it was more than just eating. It was, the room was beautiful. The chefs were so much a part of the service and the meal. Yeah, it was a kind of threw everything into the air and resettled it down a different way.
And the other thing they did that's since become, talking about fashion, is it was the first place I saw the chefs taking the food straight from the kitchen and putting it on the table. And I remember talking to him years later and going, "Oh, was that a conscious thing?" And he's going, "No, we just didn't have enough waiters," and that's where that whole style of thing came out of. Even the brown aprons, I never saw brown aprons before on chefs, and then now everyone wears brown aprons, that kind of style. So in many ways, a seminal restaurant. And I remember I've had been lucky enough to have many meals there since. But I remember that very first meal where you're just picking up this giant butterfly prawn that was probably from the Faroe Islands or something like that. And you picked it up in your hand and you wiped it across the plate with these dusting of spices, and you put it in your mouth, and it was so juicy and sweet and fantastic. So it was that kind of combination of incredible produce, and yes, there'd been a lot of thought that had gone into it. But to wind back, the current controversy, like everyone else, I kind of, as it unfolded,
and I suppose for listeners who may or may not know what the current controversy is, there was an article written in the New York Times recently about the working conditions and the abuse that was happening with staff members, unpaid interns working their long hours. That was the kind of thing that was going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on this alone, so I'll try and be as succinct as I can.
Okay.
Yeah, so the journalist Julie Muskin, I think, on the New York Times, wrote this expose, which she talked to all these members of staff that were disgruntled, and reported all this shocking stuff. This had been driven by a guy that worked in the fermentation lab, who I think it's fair to say, and I'm not going to get into any trouble here, definitely had some beef with Noma for whatever reason, and has since come out, I'd say, it's a bit of an unreliable narrator. There's two things. They had a go at Noma about the unpaid intern thing before, and, I've come across this, my career in journalism and in restaurants. I've done unpaid work at places I wanted to do to learn. I'm a dinosaur. I probably don't regret that because it helped me to get where I am now. Mm-hmm. I understand that we don't do that anymore. It's illegal to do that anymore. You've got to pay people, and I get it. And the reason why it's bad and the whole stage thing is bad is not because what people get out of it, but because it tends to, it does track people from a certain socioeconomical class. So it's not democratic. You can only afford to work for free if you've got money, right? So that's what's wrong with it as far as I'm concerned. Apart from that, getting to do work experience at the Times like I did in the early year, it was great for me. I remember like getting my first article published. Like, I couldn't have paid for that. That was wonderful. And I'd say a lot of people in creative industries would probably say the same. So that's one thing, and I got it. And I had to be in the bonnet about that. Noma, a long time ago, changed the whole thing and now pay these interns. Mm-hmm. And again, to go back to that kind of fine dining, what we're talking about, tweezering, you need an incredible amount of manpower and labour to do an El Bulli, to do a Noma, to do a Fat Duck. And that's where this came in from. But I mean, traditionally that was happening in French kitchens. Like, the stage thing, the way it worked could go, all right, I want to develop myself as a sommelier. I'm going to go off and work in a couple of 3 stars in France to see what they do there. That was what it was about originally, not about having this kind of, huge, group of Oompa Loompas who are there picking herbs and doing all of that, and which is kind of what it's become. But if you speak to, and I've spoken to a lot of the people that staged at Noma and El Bulli, and it's a who's who. A lot of them, as a journalist, you'd get sick of going, worked at Noma, worked at El Bulli, worked at the French Laundry, and it became a thing. And some of them did, and some of them didn't, by the way. Some of them maybe only did a star for a month and said they did. But it became a kind of way as a stepping stone for your career. So let's park the intern thing, right? That's a separate thing. There's stuff that was shocking when it came out about the behaviour. Again, the kind of cancellation culture, leaving aside that the guy that's driven the whole thing is an unreliable narrator, and there was a whole lot of stuff that he said. There was one thing that he said about, and whether or not this was in the article or on his own Instagram, but it's kind of been reported as being in the article. Sorry, is that you or me?
That's me, actually. I'm sorry.
But I was ringing, don't worry. So the one thing that was really shocking that came out, and again, I don't want to go back through the article. It came out through his Instagram because he'd been running an Instagram campaign for years before this article came out. Was that, there was an intern that got a burn on her face, and the head chef laughed and just watched her. And then the truth comes out. They didn't actually talk to this chef. Not only did that not happen, she did get burnt. The head chef took her to A&E and sat with her and looked after her. So there's all this kind of stuff that's been attached. But as we know, the way these things work, there's been this feeding frenzy. Rene's now the devil. Noma's a terrible place. Exploiting the workforce. The whole thing was timed to coincide with a pop-up they were doing in LA, which was expensive because it's expensive to take a whole team of people out there. I actually, again, I worked at the pop-up they did in Tulum in Mexico. I worked at the pop-up they did in Australia. I went to the original one that they did that I helped sort of introduce, which was the one they did during the Olympics in 2012.
In Japan.
No, that was in London. And the hilarious thing is I got approached to ask Rene to do it. And I said, he won't do it. I'm not going to talk to him. And I go, he's going, no. And this guy was really hassling me. And I talked to him, and it was at Claridge's. And he goes, we're closing the restaurant for a bit. We might as well do it. And that was, again, and it all kind of rolled from there, from the Olympics in 2012, and they saw this as being another way to kind of go around and do it. But in terms of the bad behavior, I get it. You know, restaurants have got a lot better. I saw some terrible stuff back in the 90s when I was working in restaurants. I worked in a one-star Michelin, I won't say where it was, as a commie, and really bad behavior, you know, by men, being aggressive with other men and bullying and all that stuff. And none of that is forgivable. René's not perfect. He did some stuff. But the stuff that he's been cancelled for is not only stuff that he fessed up to, but wrote in a book fessing up to. And the culture at Noma for the last decade, none of that stuff happened. None of that forgives all of the other things that happened. But I just feel that, I felt that article was unfair, unbalanced. And I think the response of a lot of people, like, you know, if I said anything even vaguely in the days that it broke on social media or retweeted anything, I got a whole lot of abusive messages from people going, "Oh, you're an apologist for blah, blah, blah." I was like, "No, I'm not an apologist. I'm just trying to, you know, share the other side of it." I think René's a good guy. I think he's done some stupid things. I think he confessed about those things. I think he's done a lot to actually make the restaurant industry better, if you look at the thing in the whole. And so, again, it's that thing people love, you know, it's tall poppy syndrome. We champion lots of other chefs who shall remain nameless. I know that's not remain nameless. You know, Mark Pierre-White, fantastic technician, absolute beast in the kitchen. And yet he's been put on a pedestal as someone to look up to. Gordon Ramsay, okay, who I'm not a huge fan of, and I'm sure he's not a huge fan of me, if he can even remember me. But, you know, again, championed, you know, his behavior, a lot of his behavior, which was then put over the top and made into a TV show. Even Anthony Bourdain, God bless him, the early days of Anthony Bourdain, which became this template for this kind of rock and roll chef. So, you know, championing those and at the same time knocking this guy was probably trying to change things and did manage to change things. I think it's almost because he was less kind of traditional and was trying to say, "Oh, I'm trying to make the world a better place. I'm trying to make kitchens a better place." And then to be called out and actually doing the stuff that he was trying to move away from. And the fact that Noma is so successful, and the fact that, he now has to cook for rich people because that's how it works in fine dining. All of those things combined into this feeding frenzy, which I just thought was really bad. But I was just watching a post from, you know, I think there's been a bit of a fight back, and I've been just watching a post from chefs that have worked there sort of saying, actually, here's the other side of it, you know? And people starting to listen, I think.
We're losing the ability to realise that there's two sides to every story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And,
True.
And the world is turning into, or the press or Instagram or social media, it's turning into a place where there's only one story allowed. And if you try and fight back against and people love negativity, like this world is, to my mind, it's turning into this really negative space, and if you try and sort of say there's two sides to every story and in the middle there's a truth. So René's not an angel, but actually people's memories of events are twisted with their own memories and their own experiences, even outside of the workplace. There's lots of different things going on there. And so, and you'd hope anyway that journalism should be a bit more about that middle ground.
Well, I mean, there's an article. There was one kind of food blogger type that did an article that, you know, investigated this whole thing and put it all out there. I think the reality is they're not interested. You know, the New York Times is not interested. They just want to put it out there. They want to do a big story. You know. And get some clicks and get some publicity, and it's been very successful. But I just think you should be a bit more responsible when, you know, it's a guy's life, it's a guy's business. I don't think, you know, we're not talking about Jimmy Savile, we're not talking about Epstein, and the response in some quarters, if you look at certain bits of social media, it was like that. It's like, he did some stupid. I mean, some of it was actually comedy. There's one bit about where someone was playing really bad techno music and he didn't like techno music. And he took them all outside and stood them in a circle and said, "Do you understand why this music is unacceptable?" And to me, when I read that, knowing him, I actually almost thought it was funny. It was almost kind of like ridiculous. you know?
And I can appreciate where he's coming from.
Yes, yeah, you know, and the stuff that is you know, unforgivable, distasteful is, you know, the reports of violence, of people being hit on legs or slapped or whatever. How true that is, how it happened, I don't know. That's you know, that's not cool. Definitely not cool.
No.
But
You've brought up some interesting points in that, I think.
Yeah.
Can I bring up something now? I was looking at where chefs eat today.
Yeah.
And so
Which one did you have? The purple one or the orange one?
The
Purple one. That was the last one. Yeah, that's 2017.
So we are the Republic of Ireland is listed with the United Kingdom.
Good God.
Oh my God.
There are Irish restaurants in there. I would have made sure there was Irish restaurants in there. But I mean, that wasn't my, again, the point of all this stuff, this kind of listing. And, you know, again, this is what the 50 best was meant to be. Where Chefs Eat was more about what I wanted the 50 best to be originally, which was like, there's somewhere for late night, there's somewhere for breakfast, there's somewhere that's worth the travel. Can I remember all the categories? There was high end, there was lots of little eclectic places, because originally it came from, I was lucky enough to go to El Bulli, and they had this little A4 sheet, because if you went on the pilgrimage to go to El Bulli, obviously you needed lunch the day before or dinner the day afterwards, whatever, and they'd go, if you're going through Barcelona, here's a list of some restaurants. And that got me thinking, actually, every restaurant must have this, you know what I mean? It's like someone's going to Ballymaloe, go, where would you go? Where would you go in Cork City? Where would you go? Where are the places you recommend? And I think chefs, and not just chefs, but industry people, have a kind of insight into what's going on, probably better than critics do sometimes, because they know the new place is opening, they know someone they work for. You do get the other side of it where they're plugging their friends, and so you know, so you know that's you know, objectivity's not there sometimes, but you got to kind of read through it. But they're a really good source of information, and that was the idea where Chefs Eat was like, I don't know what's going on in Sydney, but you know, I know a chef that does. I don't know what's going on in Reykjavik, but I bet you the chef in the best restaurant in Reykjavik knows what's going on there. So that was the idea.
I just have an observation about like Irish restaurant reviews and critiques. Like I found in general that we don't really write negative reviews. Like, you know, it's kind of like the small industry, close relationship, neighbourly kind of vibe, and people are almost afraid to say very bad things as there's this fear of fallout or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's not unique to Ireland, but yeah, that's probably an Irish thing. Is like it's a very small pond, and people don't want to upset people, and they maybe want to see the positive and promote things. But I mean, generally speaking, stepping back from what goes on in Ireland, is like in the UK there are two types of reviews now. There's the gushy 5 stars. This is the best meal you're ever going to have in your life. Or this is a total shithole, and you know people are reading it for the comedy effect. And the truth is, most restaurants fall between those two stools.
Yeah,
most restaurants aren't going to change your life, and most restaurants, you know, aren't that terrible that they're going to ruin your life. But that doesn't make interesting copy, as we know. So it's much easier to kind of, you know, and you know, as a writer, I remember going. There's Robin Gill, another Irish chef. I remember going to the Dairy in Clapham. And I was reviewing restaurants from Metro at the time. And it was the only place I gave 5 stars to, because I went in and it was, you know, incredible day. And he, you know, had this tomato salad, and the tomatoes were fantastic because they'd just come in the season. He had a little garden up in the roof because he'd worked for Redmond Wine, and you had to grow produce. And if you go somewhere like that and it gets you really, really excited, and I gave it 5 stars, and it was 5 stars for me at that time because I had an incredible experience. And that's fun for people to read that enthusiasm. And on the other side, it's fun for people to read, this was really, really terrible, and blah, blah, blah. And you can get, you know, you can get a lot of comedy in there when you're being negative about things. So that's a little bit about, it's what people want to read. And I think as a journalist, as a writer, you're writing for your reader. Well, you're writing for your editor and your reader. And you've got to try and be honest, but you've also got to find stuff that sells and stuff that people want to read. And the truth of the matter is, if you go in and you're very kind of like, you know, the Michelin Guide or whatever, and you're very like, this is this. We're going to give, there's, I won't mention them, but there's bloggers that go in and review every element, marking it out of 10. Jesus, try reading that. You know what I mean? It's probably fair, and it's very precise, and it's very scientific, but nobody wants to read that.
Yeah.
And people have increasingly short attention spans, and a lot of people don't even read the whole review. They'll read the headline and the stand first and the pull quote and the funny bits and swipe again. So you're dealing with an increasingly short attention span, and so you've got to find something that pulls the reader in. And so I understand it, and I think you've got to read reviews. Take them with a pinch of salt in the same way as you take things a list, and sometimes they get things right. I think with restaurant critics, as a consumer of restaurant critics, you look for a voice that you trust, basically. And I'm not going to mention any names, but there's voices I trust in the British restaurant reviewing scene, and there's voices that are like, oh, no. Just like with film, I've got a film critic I like, and I've got a film critic I don't like their taste. So it's about their taste as much as it's about what they are, experiencing. There's certain people who would go to a loud, buzzy restaurant and hate it, or someone who would be teetotal that would go somewhere that would be very boozy and loud and wouldn't get the fun element of it because they're teetotal now, which is totally fine and it's their choice. And there's other people, you know what I mean? You've got to read the character of the person and look at their taste as well, and find a voice that you trust.
Amazing. Yeah. Joe, I'm going to start reining in this conversation because I feel we've actually had the longest podcast on the Ballymaloe Festival of Food. And I could just listen to you forever. You're actually great to talk to. Tell us, what are you going to be doing at the Festival of Food in May? I'm involved in, Fat Badger's coming over. So George Williams, who's the head chef, who's English but went to Ballymaloe, and Beth O'Brien, who's a dub but went to Ballymaloe, and they met there. They're coming over. They're cooking some food. I think they want me to carry some plates and do a bit of hosting and help them out there. And then
back to that free staff thing as the
exactly.
The stage experience.
I'm available. Hopefully, I'll be sober. Although I don't know, depending on the timetable. And then I think I'm involved in a few panel discussions, discussing some of the things touching on some of the things we talked about today.
Amazing.
About restaurant criticism and lists, and hopefully I'm going to have a lot. Well, not hopefully, definitely I'm going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a great weekend. So looking forward to it, and really have to say, appreciate your time today. It's been absolutely amazing chatting to you.
Lovely chatting to you too. Look forward to seeing you soon.
So much, Joe. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Whoa, is it 2 weeks? Oh my God. Get set, go.
Yeah.